So how far will you go? How far will you go? Sin is a big deal. After all, it was Adam's sin in the garden that has condemned all to eternal torment if they do not believe in God. And it was much sin that brought about the destruction of almost all human life at the flood. And almost all animal life. And it was the sin of us that sent Christ to the cross to make a way for us to be forgiven. You can go down through the pages of history and pick out sins that had massive effects on many, many people. You can also pick out sins that had massive effects on just a few people. You can think of sins in your own life that had a big effect on you. Sin is a big deal. But I wonder, how far are you willing to go to get things right with God? In Ezra 9 and 10, a big sin issue is discovered among the Jews. The issue is properly addressed to get things taken care of. But it is a big issue which requires some drastic measures to be taken. Today we're going to look at the steps that were taken to get things right. As we do, put yourselves in their place and ask yourself, would I be willing to go that far to fix the sin issue? How far are you willing to go to get things right with God? Or will you stop partway and only do some of the steps? So here are the steps. First of all, acknowledge the sin. That's where it starts. Acknowledge the sin. Then realize our privileged position. Realize our privileged position. Third, confess the sin. Confess the sin. And finally, cleanse the life. Cleanse the life. So, those 4 steps. Acknowledge the sin, realize our privileged position, confess the sin, and cleanse the life. First of all, acknowledge the sin. So Ezra 9, verse 1. Ezra 9, verse 1, acknowledge the sin. Now when these things were done, the princes came to me, saying, the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the people of the lands, doing according to their abominations, even of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. For they have taken their daughters for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy seed have mingled themselves with the people of those lands. Yea, the hand of the princes and rulers have been sheathed in this trespass. The actions of these Jewish men were in direct violation with the law of God. As the book of Ruth testifies, it was legal for a Jewish man to marry a foreign woman if she fully renounced her old life and accepted her husband's faith. But this law did not apply to the women native to the land of Canaan. And these women had clearly not renounced their faith, because they are leading their husbands to the abominations of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. And what's their abomination? The false worship that they had. They've been leading their husbands down the primrose path to false worship. There's a problem here. According to Deuteronomy 20, verses 1 through 15, and 21, verses 10 through 14, a Jewish soldier could marry a female prisoner of war from a distant city, but was forbidden to marry a Canaanite woman. So the princes come to Ezra to notify him of the sin issue. This issue was not with just a few average Joe Jews. It's not just a few commoners. The problem was primarily with the leadership. Both physical leaders, the princes, and spiritual leaders, the priests, the Levites. So there is a fundamental issue here. And if you don't lead right, the sheep start following wrong. Okay? Sometimes the sheep still follow wrong, but if the leaders are not doing their job, it's much harder for the followers to do what is right. Before you can move forward, the first step is to acknowledge the sin. Nothing good can happen until you realize there's a sin issue, folks. The first step to recovery is admitting that there's a problem. That's the first step. If you won't admit there's a problem, you'll never fix the issue. Second step, realize our privileged position. Realize our privileged position. Verse 3. And when I heard this thing, I rent my garment and my mantle and plucked off the hair off my head and off my beard and sat down astonished. And then were assembled unto me everyone that had trembled at the words of the God of Israel because of the transgression of those that had been carried away. And I sat astonished until the evening sacrifice. And at the evening sacrifice I arose up from my heaviness, and having rent my garment and my mantle, I fell upon my knees and spread out my hands unto the Lord my God, and said, O my God, I am ashamed and blush to lift up my face to thee, my God. For our iniquities have increased over our head, and our trespasses grown up unto the heavens. Since the days of our fathers have we been in great trespass unto this day. And for our iniquities have we, our kings and our priests, been delivered into the hand of the kings of the land, to the sword, to captivity, and to spoil, and to confusion of face, as it is to this day. Sin has been a way of life to the Jews, folks, for many generations. Ezra is ashamed of the sin of the Jews, as he should be. He's the leader. Interestingly enough, as leader, he includes himself with the actual committers by saying, our iniquities. Our iniquities. He's part of the congregation, and he's the leader of the leaders. Godly leaders take responsibility for the actions of their followers. Godly leaders take responsibility for the actions of their followers. I'm the leader of my home. And if there's a problem in the home, eventually the buck stops somewhere. And it stops with me. I have the responsibility to work on that situation and try to fix it. As leader in the home, I'm part of that. Ezra knew, as the leader of the congregation, that he had responsibility here. He was part of it. Even though he had not personally done this thing, he was the leader, and he was connected to it. The sin is so bad that Ezra is ashamed and blushes just to talk to God about this serious matter. Verse 8. And now for a little space grace hath been shewn from the Lord our God to leave us a remnant to escape, and to give us a nail in his holy place. Nail is an idea of permanence. You put a nail in it, it's not designed to leave. That our God may lighten our eyes and give us a little reviving in our bondage. For we were bondmen, yet our God hath not forsaken us in our bondage, but hath extended mercy unto us in the sight of the kings of Persia, to give us a reviving, to set up the house of our God, and to repair the desolations thereof, and to give us a wall of Judah and Jerusalem. The Jews were so privileged, folks, by God's graciousness to them. They had been released from bondage, and were given favor in the sight of the kings of Persia. They had every reason to go back and do what was right. They had every reason to live holy before God. They were God's chosen people. They had been punished because of previous generations' transgressions, and now they're released to go back. You think they would go back and do what's right? No. These leaders are doing what's wrong. They had every reason to do what was right. Verse 10, And now, O our God, what shall we say after this? For we have forsaken thy commandments. Can't cover up the facts. The fact is that there is sin in spite of their privileged position. Folks, we know about Christ. We know about his death, burial, and resurrection, and most, if not all of you, have accepted that wonderful gift. You accepted his payment for your sin. You said, I'm sorry for my sins. Forgive me. Give me an eternity in heaven. And that is a privileged position. One of the deepest books theologically in the Bible is the book of Romans. It's an illustration I go to frequently, but it's one that impacts me greatly. First chapters of the book, first 11 chapters, talk about the depths of salvation. It probes the theological depths of salvation, Paul does in that book. Then chapter 12 starts off with, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice. In light of all that information about the wonderful, privileged position we as believers have, what is it that we should do? Present your bodies, everything that you are, to him a living sacrifice. Top of your head to the soles of your feet. Your relationships, your mind, your will, your desires, your bank account, your job, your hobbies, all of it gets presented to him and say, Lord, this is yours. How should I use it for you? That's what we should do because of our privileged position. But unfortunately, sometimes we, just like these Jews, go to sin. Despite the privileged position, despite having every reason to live for him, we still go after sin. So how far are you willing to go? Verse 11 of chapter 9. Which thou hast commanded by thy servants the prophets, saying, the land unto which ye go to possess it is an unclean land, with the filthiness of the people of the lands, with their abominations which have filled it from one end to another with their uncleanness. Now therefore give not your daughters unto their sons, neither take their daughters unto your sons, nor seek their peace or their wealth forever, that ye may be strong and eat the good of the land, and leave it for an inheritance to your children forever. Have nothing to do with the Canaanites, was the command. The people there are spiritually filthy. They fill the land with filthiness from one end to the other. Don't follow what they do. So what are these guys doing? They're taking wives. They're bringing that false religion into their house. Verse 13, and after all that has come unto us for our evil deeds and for our great trespass, seeing that our God has punished us less than our iniquities deserve, and hast given unto us such deliverance as this. Should we again break thy commandments and join in affinity with the people of these abominations? Wouldest not thou be angry with us till thou hast consumed us, so that there should be no remnant nor escaping? See, the exile to Babylon had occurred because of sin. The specific sin was following the practice of the Canaanites. That's what the Jews would do. They'd go after the Canaanites' religions that were there. God had kicked the Canaanites out of the land because of their wickedness. Gave it to the Jews and said, now don't do what they did. What the Jews do, they get in the land and they start doing what the Canaanites did. So eventually God kicks them out of the land. Sends them to Babylon for punishment. Now in his graciousness, he's letting them go back. But see, God did not destroy the Jews like he did most of the Canaanites. That is because our God has not punished us. Our God has punished us less than our iniquities deserve. Verse 15, O Lord God of Israel, thou art righteous, for we remain yet escaped as it is this day. Behold, we are before thee in our trespasses. We cannot stand before thee because of this. Despite their privileged position, they could not stand before God because of their transgressions. When you get sin in your life as a believer, you don't want to go talk to God. It doesn't feel good to go talk to him. When you have sin in your life, you don't want to go to church. That's how it is. When my kids do something they're not supposed to, they don't want to come up, run up to Daddy and give me a hug and go play stuff with me. No, they're slinking away into the corner and hoping Daddy doesn't notice about it. Hi, Dad. Good to see you today. I think I'll go play over here. You know, that's the way they act. Why? Because there's a break of fellowship there because they did something wrong. We're that way with God. We do something wrong and we just... I think I'll thank him for the food real quick. Thank you, Jesus, for this food. And, you're not going and talking to him. You don't want to go to church and sing his praises because there's a breach of fellowship. They couldn't stand before God because of this. Do you realize that you are privileged to know Christ as your Savior? And because of that, you should do what is right. So first you acknowledge your sin. Then you realize how foolish it was to disobey. Realize your privileged position. Step 3, confess the sin. Confess the sin. So don't stop. You got to keep going through this process, all right? You acknowledge the sin. You realize how foolish it was to do what is wrong. Then you confess the sin. Don't stop. Okay, how far are you willing to go? You need to go through the whole process. Confess the sin. Chapter 10, verse 1. Now when Ezra had prayed and when he had confessed, weeping and casting himself down before the house of God, there assembled unto him out of Israel a very great congregation of men and women and children, for the people wept very sore. And Shechaniah the son of Jael, one of the sons of Elam, answered and said unto Ezra, We have trespassed against our God, and have taken strange wives of the people of the land. Yet now there is hope in Israel concerning this thing. After Ezra sets the standard by confessing, then others start to follow. Okay? We have trespassed against our God. That's what they are saying. And have taken strange wives out of the people of the land. Yet now there is hope in Israel concerning this thing. Even though Ezra had not committed the transgression, he sets the example as the leader by confessing. Ezra confessed with weeping. Folks, he confessed with weeping. Brokenness is central to confession. When my kids come to me and they say, they say they did something wrong, whatever the transgression is, sometimes they say it with a smile. Sometimes they say it with a proud look in their face. And sometimes they say, Daddy, I'm sorry. What's the difference there? First two, they're not really sorry. That third one, they might actually be. Because brokenness is part of confession. It's critical to it. Until you're broken over your sin, you're not going to fix it. You got to look at it and say, man, this is terrible. The Bible talks about grieving the Holy Spirit because of sin. Okay? He lives inside of you. Think about that. God's inside of you and you just did thus and so. The fact of the existence of sin is not the only thing mentioned. The sin itself is also named, and that's part of it too. When you come to God, you need to say, God, I did thus and so. This is the thing I did, and it's wrong, and I'm sorry. When somebody's just, I've been screwing up lately. I go to God, yeah, God, I've sinned lately. Need to get right with you. You need to lay it out there. Lord, this is what I've done. I've done this. I've done this. I've done that. Forgive me of it. It's terrible stuff. Verse 3 of chapter 10. No, now therefore let us make a covenant with our God to put away all the lies and such as are born of them according to the counsel of my Lord, and of those that tremble at the commandment of our God, and let it be done according to the law. Arise, for this matter belongeth unto thee. We also will be with thee, be of good courage, and do it. Then arose Ezra and made the chief priests, the Levites, and all Israel to swear that they should do according to this word. And they swear. Then Ezra rose up from before the house of God and went into the chamber of Johanan, the son of Eliashib. And when he came thither, he did eat no bread nor drink water, for he mourned because of the transgression of them that had been carried away. So Ezra withdraws to a private place to fast. Verse 7. And they made proclamation throughout Judah and Jerusalem unto all the children of the captivity, that they should gather themselves together into Jerusalem, and that whosoever would not come within 3 days, according to the counsel of the princes and the elders, all his substance should be forfeited, and himself separated from the congregation of those that have been carried away. Everyone was to come to this council. The sin has already been uncovered, so anyone coming would know the problem. But many came because they wanted to do what was right. They were in essence confessing their sins. They're coming there saying, I messed up. Let's get this thing right. Confess the sin. It might seem easy until you start to admit your faults. But it is the right thing to do. Many people look at it, oh yeah, I'll get this thing right. And then they start to admit it and they, I messed up. You got to lay it out. You got to admit it. Confess it. You made a mistake, own up to it. It was your mistake, it's not somebody else's. So finally we get to cleanse the life. Sin is acknowledged. The position is realized. The confession is made. Now it's time to fix it. Okay? Take that steps and fix it. And folks, think about the steps these men are taking to fix this. Do you think that these steps are easy to take? Absolutely not. Chapter 10, verse 9. Then all the men of Judah and Benjamin gathered themselves together into Jerusalem within 3 days. And it was the 9th month on the 20th day of the month. And all the people sat in the street of the house of God, trembling because of this matter. And for the great rain, it was the rainy season. It was raining a bunch right then. So everyone gets together, ready to fix this issue. They're ready to take this final step and cleanse their lives. Verse 10. And Ezra the priest stood up and said unto them, Ye have transgressed and have taken strange wives to increase the trespass of Israel. Now therefore make confession unto the Lord God of your fathers, and do his pleasure, and separate yourselves from the people of the land and from the strange wives. Confess and do. Action follows confession. Verse 12. Then all the congregation answered and said with a loud voice, As thou hast said, so must we do. All the congregation that's there agree that this must be dealt with. Verse 13, but the people are many, and it is a time of much rain, and we are not able to stand without. Neither is this a work of 1 day or 2, for we are many that have transgressed this thing. Let now our rulers of all the congregation stand, and let them which have taken strange wives in our cities come at appointed times, and with them the elders of every city and the judges thereof, until the fierce wrath of our God for this matter be turned from us. The problem's not taken care of, God's wrath will come upon them. It's interesting here. It's pouring down rain. It's the rainy season. They probably don't have umbrellas. They don't have automobiles to drive around. They're coming to these cities in the rain, and they're taking care of the issue. See, when you're ready to take care of the situation, take those steps. The devil's real good at putting up roadblocks, making it convenient to wait for a later date. It would have been convenient for these people to say, well, we'll take care of this in a few months once the rainy season passes. That's the better time to do it. We'll just wait. What do though? No, we're going to get it taken care of. We're going to find a way and fix the issue. And that's what we should do when we have sin. When the devil throws up those roadblocks, say, we're going to take care of it. Verse 15. Now Jonathan the son of Asahel and Jehaziel the son of Tikva were employed about this matter. And Meshullam and Shabbathah the Levite helped them. So 4 guys are working with this situation. And the children of the captivity did so. And Ezra the priest with certain chief of the fathers after the house of their fathers. And all of them by their names were separated and sat down in the first day of the 10th month to examine the matter. And they made an end with all the men that had taken strange wives by the first day of the first month. There was never a situation that these Jews would be okay to marry a Canaanite. These marriages were in a direct violation of God's law. So the women must be divorced and sent away. It says also the offspring. Today we look at this story and we say to ourselves, why would God not just allow this to happen, these divorces to happen? Why would he want this to happen? Because obviously this is what needed to happen, according to the scriptures. This is not one of the reasons listed for divorce in the New Testament. Like if you look at the New Testament, there's two clear situations. If you have a believing and an unbelieving couple, the unbelieving one is allowed to depart without guilt being placed on the believing couple, on the believer. Okay. The other situation is adultery, and I think you should be consistent adultery. Those are the two situations in the New Testament. But remember, the New Testament things are different. God is working in a different way. You don't have the separation of the Jews from the Gentiles. This is a different time period. And this was another reason, another cause for divorce. In order to regain the spiritual purity, especially for the priests, the women had to be divorced and the offspring sent away. Because this false religion was being brought in to the congregation. These women hadn't renounced their faith. They were still believing it. They had not accepted the faith of Yahweh. So then in verse 18 it says, "And among the sons of the priests there were found that had taken strange wives, namely," then you have the list of offenders. Verse 44, "All these had taken strange wives, and some of them had wives by whom they had had children." About 100 people total had taken wives, a small percentage relative to the whole group that was there. But a little leavening leavens the whole lump. It doesn't take much sin. And if the leaders now, a few leaders now, are allowing the sin to persist, what's the next generation going to do? And the generation after that. If you allow this false worship to start to propagate amongst the children of the leaders, what's going to happen? There have been many great leaders in the past, but their children have got into sin. And then those children became great leaders of wickedness. So, how far are you willing to go? Do you think these men love these women? Do you think they love the children? Do you think some of these women might have been really pretty, or might have been really good cooks, or maybe both? Well, sure. And yet, they do what's right. How far are you willing to go? First, acknowledge the sin. Then, realize our privileged position. Third, confess the sin. And finally, cleanse the life. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you so much for what you've done for us, and I pray that you would give each of us the strength to see sin, to realize how foolish it is, to confess the sin,